Thank you. First, I'll just tell you a little about myself. I'm a recovering attorney. I practiced law in Portland for over 25 years, did mostly business, real estate law, and did a lot of employment law, discrimination cases, and that sort of thing. About 12 years ago, some people said I had a midlife crisis. I had a change in my plans, and I went out of the country for about 3 years, including 2 years in the Peace Corps in South America. I have 2 children. I'm married. I have 3 grandchildren. They're all living here in Oregon. My government work is that I work for the legislature. I was a lobbyist. I was executive assistant to a Portland city commissioner and then later a Portland mayor. I was director of economic development for the city of Portland. And for 15 years, I was chair of the Multnomah County Civil Service Commission. I'm a veteran, as I mentioned, a Peace Corps volunteer. I do a lot of non-governmental activities. I volunteer in the school. I teach classes in the school. I've been a tutor, a mentor for at-risk kids in the school. Assisted the refugee community when it first came to Portland, and we helped make loans to refugee businesses. And today I just continue with a lot of international humanitarian projects, primarily in Central and South America. So a little about my background. I'm going to skip a lot of what I think are more local issues because I'm really just so concerned about what's going on in this country now. Particularly, we're facing a finance crisis. We've kind of forgotten about the energy crisis here for a few days, and then we have terrorists out there. And it just seems like this is a day to kind of reflect on who we are and why we are in the position we're in. Most of that, my life and doing those different positions I described, I was a Democrat, and I changed a few years ago. And maybe this is a good time to talk about why I changed, because I see some very fundamental issues facing us. I'll just talk about the housing crisis very quickly here. It may have come as a surprise to a lot of you that we got here, but ever since I came back in 2001, I have been following this, and it has been reported. It hasn't been on public broadcasting. It hasn't been on Fox News. It hasn't been in New York Times, but there has been a consistent issue with housing and the bubble and how we are financing our housing in this country, and people were trying to do something about it, and it wasn't reported. It wasn't talked about, but I can show you a steady stream of articles and editorials in the Wall Street Journal for the last 7 or 8 years on this crisis. I'm sorry, I'm not talking loud enough? All right. I'll try to talk a little louder. Sorry. And people have said, well, we got greedy. Well, there was a lot of greed. You know, it was a good deal. You could go out and you could get a 100% loan at a very low interest rate. And if everybody's saying, gee, price of housing is going up, a year later it's worth 10% more, you could roll the house. There were shows on TV, flip this house. And you just make a lot of money off it. There was no risk involved, and so we all went crazy. People had 1 house or 2 houses. I know people that have 5 or 6 houses because it's such a good deal. Well, why was it a good deal? Well, our government went out partly and said through the Community Redevelopment Act, banks, you've got to make loans to people that can't pay them. Give them 100% loans. And it's not a bad deal for you because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to buy those loans from you, and you're not going to have any risk. And then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac took those loans, bundled them, and made them into securities and sold them back to us and to the banks. And the bank says, hey, this is a good deal because now I don't have a risk about housing in just one little community. I've got mortgages from all over the country, and they're guaranteed by Freddie and Fannie. And so you couldn't go wrong. And then the houses keep going up. And as the value of those mortgages went up, banks loaned more money. And then, but then we did some some regulation. And people say, oh, you know, we underregulated this market. We didn't underregulate this market. The biggest deregulation was do away with the Glass-Steagall Act, which said investment banks and regular banks had to be separate. If we had not done that, our crisis would be worse. Wells Fargo and Bank of America have stepped up as regular banks and bought things like Merrill Lynch, which they couldn't have done had we not deregulated. But what we did with regulation, and some of it came out of Enron, is we had the Community Reinvestment Act that said, banks, you got to make bad loans. You had Fannie Mae who had said they would buy the loans. And then you had these securities going around. I only got 2 minutes, so I'm not even going to get up to talk about everything I want to talk about. And you also had what they called mark-to-market. So when those securities went up in value, the banks could make more loans. But when the securities went down and they went almost to zero, you had to mark your securities to the market, which meant that your equity disappeared. And so people, even though they had money to make, could pay their debts, went bankrupt. And that's what's happened with all their banks. On the books, they are bankrupt, but 96, 97% of people are still paying their mortgages. So we've created a crisis for ourselves, and a lot of this crisis, and the people who resisted regulation on Freddie and Fannie were Chris Dodd of Connecticut and Barney Frank. And those are people that are designing the bailout. So I have got great concern. 1 minute. So I get back to my Republican values. And what is it? I think centralized government and centralized financial power are dangerous. And the proposal that we are going to give our federal government the authority to decide what's bad debt, who's going to buy it, at what price, is a dangerous idea. I think I'm just forgetting his name here because I'm terrible at names. Berkshire Hathaway did a better job with buying Goldman Sachs. They went in and said, we'll give you money, but we are going to decide, it's going to be senior debt. So if you go bankrupt, we get paid first. If you make money, we get to convert it, and we get to recover from the profit. But that company now has the responsibility to manage that bad debt and hopefully make money off of it. That's what we should be doing with every bank, not giving it to the taxpayer, but requiring each bank to manage its own debt. And if they don't, then they go broke, not the taxpayer. So when I look at what's going on, it violates my Republican principles, and if a given time, I'll talk about why the energy program and why our terror program are not the best ideas that we're pursuing right now. Thank you.